the project, and myself and Stephanie were very familiar with Cheryl Mizuna's Partnering for Change model. And the idea was that if we're going to go out into schools in an outreach capacity, we want to be supporting at the universal level, because we know there's not a huge amount of support happening because our local NHS is so busy. So going in there at school level was a space that we wanted to work in. We also thought that we could do some targeted work with children in the schools, so long as it complemented and didn't overlap with what the local NHS was doing. So it was trying to sort of build capacity in the local community. So we developed this model. We were going to send students out in groups at universal level, but we wanted to find out what the needs were in the local schools. We didn't really want to go out and sort of pigeonhole ourselves into what we would offer. We wanted to know what the needs were in the schools first, and then focus what we were offering off the back of that. So we did some work on the occupational therapy practice framework, where we would do a school profile and identify the needs for the schools. So that was about the piloting, identifying need, getting feedback from schools early on, trying to audit what the students were actually doing. So what are the needs of the school and what are the students doing? And so we got it up and running in the first year. And Caroline, next slide there, thanks.
Yeah.
And so we were using this Partnering for Change model, which most of you might be familiar with. But the idea is that if you have good whole school practice, that you are delivering what is essential for some kids to have, but it helps all kids. So this idea of good, solid whole school practice. And then the targeted areas where some children don't respond to good whole school practice and they need some targeted intervention. So we were working a little bit at that level as well, was the vision. The learning outcomes for each placement are carefully mapped to the activities that the students will be doing. And of course, they're underpinned by various different frameworks, which are on the slide here. The RCOT Career Development Framework being one. That framework in particular runs right through the curriculum at Brunel, and so we will see it a lot in our placements anyway. Caroline? So we were initially rooted in schools, definitely in the first year and a half. And then we started to get some requests coming in from other organizations, but also we have these placements that run over the summer. And, summer can be really difficult to find placements, and schools are out. So what do you do when schools are out? So Caroline did, a great job at partnering with various charities to map out what our students could do while the schools were closed. So we were partnering with local charities, the local NHS teams, but also we had some research projects running as well. So I've just finished a funded Royal College of OT grant. It was the Research Priority Grant looking at handwriting versus typing. And we had students on placement on that grant out testing children on handwriting and reading and spelling, vocabulary and typing. But they would do elements of standardized assessment in that project, which would complement what they were doing across the other areas. Go ahead, Caroline. And so how it sort of works, or why we think this is sort of unique, is that it's a blend of research and clinical practice. So we have a lot of expertise at Brunel through Carolyn Dunford, Leanna Nagy, Lorna Wales, myself, quite a research active group, Ty Fraser, for example. And so we provide some of the research and the knowledge for translation, and then Caroline, Stephanie, Samira and Leah work really well as a team to implement some of our research findings, but sort of come up with these placements in terms of learning outcomes and what the students will do. We plan that together to think about, well, what's running now and what will this next placement look like? So that's sort of how it works. We're a team, and I'm going to hand over to Caroline to talk about the structure of the placements and what the students do.
Okay, thank you. So
Okay, so the placements can look quite different depending on the level of placement that the students might be on. So it can look quite different if they're on their final placement compared to their first placement. But generally, we have like a team of students allocated to us, and we can take up to 10 students, and we then become a team, the Kids Space Children's Clinic team, and then we tend to break up into smaller teams, but the students will be allocated into different schools, but we come together as one big team as well. And as Melissa just said, we do have like a little mini team, but we are less than a one full-time role. So we do share our responsibilities out, but Leah and I share the practice placement education. We set up all the placement, we do the supervision, we complete all the paperwork and admin, and the students will have an on-site. So in the school, they will have a mentor and kind of a lead person looking after them. But generally, we are the practice placement educators, and I usually meet with the schools or those mentors. They're usually the Senkos or the inclusion lead, or yeah, that's usually who it is. And I would usually meet with them before the beginning of the placement, before the students, start, in plenty of time to think about what it is, what support and input is needed, and then we agree that, and then map that against the learning outcomes, the student learning outcomes before the start of the placement. And this is like really critical because it's a lot of the work is around managing expectations. So managing the school's expectations and really reinforcing that we're working at this universal level, and we're not going to be giving individual specialist occupational therapy advice and intervention. So this is a big part of the setup of the placement. And then we have the OT students based in a school setting, but then we also do have time within their week where they're back on campus with us, so we can train them and kind of guide them through their placement experience in schools. And when we're on campus, this will include things like their induction. There's a lot of orientation to working in schools that's needed. There's certain policies and processes that students would not be aware of, and you're only aware of those policies if you work in schools. So things like, keeping children safe in education, some of the cultural elements of being in a school, like that you can't have your phone anywhere outside of the staff room. These kind of things we spend quite a lot of time at the beginning setting up with the students, so they know quite clearly what's expected of them and what their role is. We offer training and then obviously supervision, and then they have time on campus to work on some of the projects that they're working on. Sometimes they work on them in the setting, and sometimes they work on them back at campus, just really depending on um, the school setup, because if you've worked in schools, you will know rooms and spaces are very short supply. And then we have group supervision, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few slides down. And then it's about giving feedback and sort of monitoring the placement. So how we set it out initially, like Melissa was explaining, kind of sent out this expression of interest, and we completed these occupational profiles looking at what the need was in our local schools. But over time, we kind of have a waiting list now of schools, and schools are reaching out to me, and they tend to send like an email, "Oh, we're really interested. We've heard you've done this great project, or you've done this. Can we be involved?" So we find out what's needed and what it looks like, and then I would usually meet with the school to find out, a bit more detail about what it is, but then really explaining what it is that we can do and how we work so that we're all on the same page and those expectations are managed. And then we usually agree that area of need and support in advance and we make a plan. So usually I might say to the Senko, this sounds really great. Could you meet with the students during their induction week on campus and give them a briefing so that the students are hearing what the school are hoping for before they even go into the school? And then we spend a bit of time on campus unpicking that and planning and thinking about what it is and how we can support that. We really emphasize this focus on universal and targeted support. When we do targeted support in schools, we're really thinking of that partnering for change model where it's about coaching and collaborative working. And we really want to have the TAs or somebody from the education team on board with us whilst we're doing that targeted work so that the work can continue when when the students have placement has finished, and it's that upskilling, coaching in context role. And then we spend a lot of time thinking about the role of an OT student compared to the role of a volunteer in schools. So schools have lots of volunteers, and we at Brunel we have OT students that go and volunteer in school. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about what is the role of our OT students, what is it that they can do, and how is that going to look different to other volunteers in a school setting. And a lot of my job and our placement team's job is around managing these expectations for the students as well, because they won't be with an OT every moment of the day, and we need to help them to understand that they will see the OT process and they will see the role of an OT in school, but they're not going to be with an OT the whole time. And then we really try to take this co-production approach. So we want to get all of the stakeholders on board. We want to be working collaboratively. We want to be solution focused. So what's the need? What can we help with? What's the main problem or difficulty or challenge? And how can we support that through our students and make this a positive experience for everyone? So for the students, they do get to see the whole OT process in schools. They might not be working with individual children, but they can still manage to experience the whole OT process. We do assessments, and we do, some standardized. Very rarely, it's more non-standardized and more kind of observations and because we're really focusing on the occupational profiles and those universal and targeted interventions. And then we really try to work collaboratively with our education colleagues, and it's about the capacity building in the schools as well. So we want to help schools to understand more the role of OT and how they can use OT informed approaches in their day-to-day work, even when the students aren't there, because we want this carryover and sustainability in the projects and the work that the students are doing. We often hold training is a really big part of our role. We've delivered lots and lots of trainings to schools through inset days and twilight sessions, and we've done some parent workshops. We've held stay and play mornings and coffee mornings, and the students are often, nearly always, involved in some kind of quality improvement or service improvement projects for the schools and the settings that we support. So what does this actually look like, and what is it that they're actually doing? So I've picked out a few of the key things that we tend to see. I'm seeing, and now we're in our third year, there are definitely some kind of themes in the areas of need. So handwriting is kind of where we might do some standardized assessments, that we might do the dash, or so that's probably the only way we have done standardized assessments, but there's a big focus on handwriting, helping schools to develop and write handwriting policies, carry out some assessments and deliver some interventions, write some handwriting programs. We've done some work around the visuals to support handwriting development. So, what does a good seated posture look like, for example? Helping the schools to have self-evaluation handwriting measures that the children can use in their handwriting work. We've completed environmental audits, so we've looked at the classroom environments, and this is it can be a sensory audit, but it's also just like the environment, the physical layout, whether there's a learning wall, what the displays are like, what their routines are like in the classroom or school environment, and how we can help the school to have calmer transitions. And there's been a focus on regulation. We get asked a lot about sensory circuits and delivering sensory circuits, but we try to keep an occupation focus, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But we might incorporate physical activity. How can children access PE? How can PE be more accessible? Some of our students have come up with a bit of a protocol and a group called Move My Make, which some of the schools have taken on board. We've done some targeted interventions, and this is around things like joining in the dining hall and developing cutlery skills, or carrying a tray, or scraping the food leftovers into the right places. So some of those sort of sequencing. And then with our local NHS team, we've delivered the primary to secondary school transition groups in collaboration with the NHS teams. We're doing that again in the summer, and we've supported summer camps, we've delivered interventions on campus, and we've been supporting the university research. So this is just an example of, this is students who were on a 4-week placement with us, and it was their first practice placement. We don't normally take first. Oh no, this was this was their first placement. So they were on a 4-week practice placement, and the briefing from the school was that a lot of the children are coming into nursery with delayed motor skills, delayed speech, and the nursery team were having difficulty knowing how to progress children on and move them, help them to support their development. And they were aware about the impact of COVID on children's development, and they just wanted some support around what typical development might look like and how it sort of tied in. And they also wanted a resource where they could that they could use to share with the parents, because sometimes it was quite hard for them to have a conversation with the parents. So the students have produced this wonderful leaflet. You can see there's a QR code which anyone can scan, which takes them to the evidence that's been used to guide the leaflet. And then the students linked this to the early years framework and mapped out the OT side of things with the national curriculum early years framework. And we use the OTPF4 to give structure to our placement. So the OTPF4 is a really useful framework because it really helps students to understand that we can work with whole schools or whole classes or whole groups rather than just an individual. And we really emphasize having this occupation focus in schools. So when I meet with the Senkos at the beginning of the placement to set it up, they will ask questions like, oh, we need fine motor skills. We need you to work on their sensory needs. But I help try to reframe the thinking and bring it back to the occupation. And it's a really nice frame. The OTPF4 is a really nice framework to bring it back to those areas of occupation, and then what that might look like in the school setting. And that's how we can get around that. So just in terms of some impact, I won't read the whole of the slides, but basically we've had no trailing placements in the last few years. We've had 60 students on placement. 100% of schools agreed that their understanding of OT has improved and that their community has benefited from having OT input. The school and education team felt like that they've been really listened to and that we've been working collaboratively. And most students have rated their placement experience as good or very good, and they would recommend it to a friend. Um, and we collect feedback from the students, the school teams, and anyone that's been involved in the placement after the placement is finished. And that helps to contribute to the students' feedback as well. And I just want to share about group supervision because in this model, one-to-one supervision isn't feasible. So we have group supervision, and we've been really surprised at how the students report that they really enjoy having group supervision. At first, they find it quite hard, but then they get really into it. They like hearing each other's perspectives. It helps to bring up their own skills, and they feel that they've developed skills in things like giving feedback to each other, drawing out discussion themes, and developing some of these soft skills, these communication skills. And we do have one-to-one supervision at the midway and at the end of the placement, or if it's needed throughout, but generally we stick with a group supervision model. So all students have graduated at the expected time. The students report this in enhanced professional growth and development, as well as confidence and competence in working with children and young people. 80, nearly 90% of students have got a grade B or above. Our school and community partners have rated the students' performance as exceptional or as very good, and 100% of students who've been through this placement would recommend it to their friends. We now have students, when we first started it, students said, oh no, because they didn't see it as a real placement. Now we have students emailing us saying, can we get this, can we come on this placement? And yeah, ultimately the schools feel that their understanding of occupational therapy has improved and that their school community has benefited from having OT students. So I'm going to hand you back to Melissa.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So over the last 2.5, 3 years, we've had 119 OT students across 30 schools, reaching about 1,500 children. What I really love about this project is its connection with research. So we won a Research Impact Award in 2023, the impact of the research going out into schools. We've had 2 abstracts accepted for the European Network of OTs in Higher Education conference in October. And we have a page on the RCOT Innovation Hub now, which is wonderful. So thank you to RCOT for that. We are also looking to evaluate this and apply for research funding to be able to create a model that's replicable and scalable across the UK and possibly Ireland because there's very similar needs there. Thanks, Caroline. Next slide there. So just to bring it to a close, we have addressed placement shortages, and Caroline and I were laughing a couple of months ago because she had very few students going to her last term. And we said, well, why is that? Why is so little been assigned? And she said, because everyone's been in it. So it looks like, every student on the OT programs at Brunel has had a placement in schools, which I think is really wonderful, given the need, in children's services, but also the growth of OTs in schools. So it's a nice problem to have. But yeah, so in terms of the other impacts and conclusions, the linking of theory has been really important for us. So Cheryl Mizuna's Partnering for Change really underpins the work, and the OTPF really complements that as well, because it allows us to talk in occupation focused language, and it's really accessible for students to navigate once they have their head around the document. Go ahead, Caroline. And so the placements, yeah, they've addressed shortages more generally. And, you know, it takes, I think the next slide, Caroline, which you can go to, talks about how it takes a village. It really does. And I think it's been wonderful for me over the last 2.5 years to work with this team. I had a busy role as divisional lead. You know, we had a lot of students, we had major accreditation, rewrites and everything, but Caroline's been absolutely wonderful making this run seamlessly in the background. And it's really nice to be able to present this work and say thank you to Leah, Samira, Stephanie, Caroline for all your work on it. So I think that brings our talk to an end, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Caroline.